Welcome to the recap of the Zalma Staff Hunger Games. We're your game hosts, Jonathan Lightnin and Hayden Burke. This year, we selected 6 great departments, including English, Math, Science, History, PE, and the electives. We drew 2 teachers from each department, and there is a great competition this year with a variety of skills all around. Let's meet our competitors. From English, we have Fitz and Hansman. Math, we have Sturgeon and Mr. Weedham. Science, we have Throne and Radford. History, we have Mr. Nickerson and Penrod. With physical education, we have Davidson and Dr. Fullerton. And from electives, we have Ojeda and Edwards. Let's get to the rules. How the games work. There are 12 competitors to start. You're entered into an artificial arena. All of the weapons are in the cornucopia. All of them are medieval weapons, and it is a complete free-for-all.
All the competitors arrive at the capital. Once they arrive, the 7-day preparation period began. Most of the contestants trained vigorously, enhancing their skills with weapons and trying to get some last-minute training in. There were 4 main contenders that stood out during this time period, though. The first one was Mr. Weedham. He knew he needed some extra help if he wanted to win, so he decided to appeal to sponsors and try to get as many people as possible interested in his story. Miss Hansman decided to try and focus as much on learning as much about the arenas and about surviving in the wild. She also did some cardio training, martial arts training, and target practice. Mr. Penrod and Dr. Fullerton both took on similar routes with their training. Mr. Penrod focused on hydrating, relearning a lot of survival skills, and lots of stretching. Dr. Fullerton decided to hydrate like Mr. Penrod, but he also decided to go barefoot, carb load, and tan. All of these extra preparations from Dr. Fullerton will help him to survive in any circumstance he gets put in. Now, let's get to the footage.
As the games begun, we follow Fitz to the cornucopia. During the preparation phase, she had made an alliance with Davidson and Ojeda, where she would run into the cornucopia and grab resources for them to survive while they ran into the nearby forest. When she finally arrived at the cornucopia, she found a bow and some arrows. Since she was the first one to grab a weapon, she looked around to attempt to take out someone early. She succeeded and took out Nickerson as he was still running to the cornucopia. Fitz grabs a few more resources for the gang and starts to leave into the forest. Fullerton and Radford started out close to each other, and Fullerton beelined for him as he hates those science geeks. He grabbed him by the neck and strangled him to death. Fullerton then turned his attention to Fitz, who was trying to leave the cornucopia. He saw that Fitz had a bow, so he decided to keep his distance and let Fitz go after a long stare-down. As Fullerton and Fitz were at a standoff, Edward slipped in and grabbed all the weapons he needed and escaped into the desert harm-free. The rest of the competitors made their way to the forest, avoiding the cornucopia.
Sturge had decided to go through part of the marsh in his attempt to go to the forest. Unfortunately for him, Penrod had the same idea. The two locked eyes and were at a standoff. That was when Penrod remembered that Sturge had Achilles problems, so Penrod decided to go straight for him. Sturge was unable to get away because of his heel mixed with the mud of the marsh and got wrestled to death.
Because Fullerton is a certified badass, he was left to claim the cornucopia. After grabbing and stashing his weapons, he decided to start his killing spree in the forest. He knew that everyone wanted to team up with him, so he played this to his advantage. He followed Hansman's trail in the forest until he found her. That's when he offered to trade weapons for food, since Hansman had been gathering food. Hansman decided to trust Fullerton, since she really had no other choice, as she could not take on Fullerton, nor could she escape him. As the two got close, he stabbed her through the chest with a spear, leaving 2/3 of the competition left.
Throne was smart from the start and gathered the materials to make a bow. After that, he made a little camp up in some trees near the easternmost river. The camp was very well camouflaged, so people from the ground couldn't see him. He had enough resources to survive for a while at this point, so he started to switch his focus to hunting people. His main goal was to disband teams so he'd have a greater chance of winning. He set out to do this by crafting a lot of arrows. Throne had his camp complete at this point, so he went hunting for food.
Ojeda and her gang finally met up and started searching for resources. They had weapons, but that was about it. Since they were a group, they would need a lot more basic supplies like food and water, so they set out to find a sustainable water source and hunt wildlife along the way. Fitz was their main hunter since she had the best aim out of the 3. Ojeda was their cook, and Davidson was kind of there just to be intimidating. Fitz had seen a boar off in the distance and decided to take a shot. She hit it, but not where she wanted to, so it went running off. When the gang caught up to the boar, Fitz put another shot into it, securing the kill. As they went to harvest its body, Davidson noticed a river in the distance. Knowing that they would have easy access to water would be a huge advantage, they sprinted towards it. Fitz and Davidson were at full speed approaching the river when Ojeda stopped. She felt like they were being watched and started to look around. That's when Davidson and Fitz turned around to see an arrow through Ojeda's heart. Fitz and Davidson crossed the river, hoping to avoid whoever shot Ojeda.
Edwards was having a tough time while all this was going on. He had been the only person to flee into the desert. His plan was to go build a sand empire one castle at a time. He was 2 castles in when he heard some strange sounds in the distance. That was when he looked over his shoulder to see a pack of emus charging towards him. In pure panic, Edwards trips over his sandcastles and forgets his knife. With the emus still chasing Edwards, he runs east towards the marsh. The emus chase Edwards until he arrives in the marsh. Edwards was still scared regardless and kept running deeper. He ran and ran until he could not feel his legs and tripped in the mud. He just lay there in the mud thinking about what to do next until he started to hear some more strange sounds. He stood up and saw a huge boa constrictor right next to him. The boa constrictor grabs him and carries him over to a muddy pond. Edwards was able to free his arm and punch the snake in the face, making it lose its grasp. Edwards then ran into the muddy puddle and was going to try and swim away until he got chomped up by a crocodile.
Penrod by this time had been doing pretty well. He found a nice area in the forest where he was preparing to survive for a long time. He was in the middle of building a fire when he saw an arrow soar past him. He looked from the direction it came from and saw someone move behind a tree. Penrod immediately started to sprint towards them. He was weaving in between trees just in case they reloaded and tried to shoot at him again. As he was almost to the tree where he saw the person, he got tripped by Davidson, who then lunged onto him and stabbed him with an arrow. Fitz then peered around the tree and fired an arrow into Penrod's skull, instantly killing him.
Weedham was now the only person left without a kill. Throughout all the chaos, Weedham had just been scrounging around for supplies and playing it safe. Eventually, he sees a stash of weapons in the forest. He knew that Fulton had won the cornucopia, so he was skeptical of this big stash of weapons just laying on the floor. He went towards the pile of weapons with caution, constantly looking over his shoulder and around trees. He was about to turn around and run away, but he remembered that he desperately needed a weapon if he was going to survive, so he carried on. He saw a knife a few feet from the pile. His plan was to run over, pick it up, and run off, so he started running. He got the knife, grabbed it, and started running southbound. He thought that he had succeeded, but he ran right into Fulton's line of sight. Fulton was going back to his stash of weapons when he noticed Weedham running. Now Fulton was chasing Weedham north, towards the cornucopia. They are both fast men who can run for a while. Fulton was being slowed down by a spear, though, so Weedham created some big distance between them. But then Weedham tripped on the edge of the cornucopia. That allowed Fulton to make up a lot of distance. Weedham decided to go into the cornucopia in hopes that Fulton would slip into the water. Unfortunately for Weedham, he was on a narrow pathway, and Fulton saw a perfect opportunity to throw his spear, which hit Weedham in his leg. Weedham lost his balance when he got hit and fell into the water and drowned.
Fulton then headed back to his pile of weapons to think about what to do next. As he approaches, he spots Davidson and Fitz rummaging through his stash. Fulton decided to charge after them. Fitz and Davidson ran towards the nearby river, and Fulton stopped by his stash to grab a new spear and knife. They arrive at the river and decide to swim across since there was a big gap between them and Fulton. They reach the other side when Fulton comes into view, and Davidson decides to betray Fitz by shoving her back into the river so Fulton can kill her. Fitz drops her bow as she falls in and gets impaled by Fulton's spear shortly after. Davidson goes to get some cover and wait for Fulton to cross the river. Fulton does end up crossing the river, and Davidson peeks out to take a shot when he gets killed from behind by Throne. Davidson had entered his camp of trees and stayed in the same place for too long. Fulton watched where the arrow that killed Davidson came from. He knew where Throne was, so he grabbed his spear from Fitz's body. Throne did not have enough time to reload, as Fulton threw his spear, impaling Throne, making Fulton the champion.